So we'll just welcome everyone. Thank you very much. This is the second of our 4 bite-sized webinars through the Farm Advisory Service. So we thank Scottish Government for providing funds to allow us to put these webinars on. Ideally, as Hannah was saying, we'd rather be in a room or a shed discussing these things, but it certainly opens up to a big audience, and we're grateful for you to come along. I'll let Hannah introduce herself, but my name's Ross Mackenzie. I met Hannah through working with the Pig Information Group, a little group that brought advisors, researchers, and veterinary education together, and it was really nice. She's, as we say, we've got a great vet in Jill Thompson. I think Hannah showed an interest in pigs, so Jill's grabbed her and got her in her side as well. So I'll say no more and hand you over to Hannah for the presentation. Cheers. And we have some polls, Hannah, so just I'll pop in when we're ready to do the polls.
Excellent. You'll keep me right.
Okay. Cheers.
Lovely. Oh, thanks ever so much. That was a great introduction. As Ross said, I'm Hannah Orr and I work at the Disease Surveillance Centre in Aberdeen. And I've been there for the last 9 years. My job title is a veterinary investigation officer. So I'm a vet there that does post-mortem work and also things like this, farmer talks and vet talks and writing articles, and I'm on the phones quite a lot of days as well. So, you know, speaking to folk about their veterinary issues and advice, mostly to vets in practice who need some further advice and are doing a bit of testing and so on. So yeah, I have a lovely varied job which I really enjoy. And as Ross said, we are quite a busy centre with post-mortems, and across the centres for SRUC across Scotland where we do post-mortems at the vet labs, we get the most pigs into ours. So yeah, I have shown an interest in pigs over the years. It's good to know about them where we're working, and we've got some really good pig producers. And my colleague, who's Danish, joined us not that long ago, and she's also really interested in pigs as well. So that's nice to have a fellow colleague with an interest too. So pig health and disease. Tonight I'm going to speak to you topics to cover. Here we go. Let's find my forward arrow. Oh, that wasn't very promising, was it? There we go. Tonight I'm going to speak to you more about, you know, how can you keep an eye on your pigs and the bits and pieces to know when they're poorly. And then I am going to speak about biosecurity, so how to keep disease out and also to stop it spreading. And then some of the common diseases. Now, I was saying to Ross, I don't want to go in depth on lots of diseases because, you know, it's taken me years to get to grips with the common pig diseases. And to be honest, you know, you can pick up a book, or you can pick up the phone to your vet or to somebody you know who you trust that can give you good advice. Or I would have a few trusted websites as well that you know you'll get accurate advice from. So in terms of knowing all the diseases, if you think there's something wrong with your pig, then that's really the very first step, and that's the important bit, that you're able to notice when they've gone away from being in good health to when they're getting poorly. And that's the important bit for you. And you might know to treat some of the sort of first aidy stuff, but after that the most important bit is to know where to go next, or to be happy that you've got a good vet who you can pick the phone up to and ask for advice. So yeah, I would like to cover what does a pig look like when it's in good health, and you know, when are the times that you need to intervene. But yeah, please do put stuff in the chat tonight if you want to ask Ross things, or ask via Ross, ask me things. That's great. So prevention is definitely better than cure in any animals, and it's really important with your pigs to know what's normal. So you need to look every day, and you need to be checking them and have a wellness checklist. And I'll go on to that in the next slide, what you might be looking for in your daily checklist. if you think there are abnormalities there and it's more than just a cut or a scratch or a, or maybe he's gone over on his ankle, let's see how he gets on for the next few hours sort of thing, then you need to pick up the phone to somebody. So there's always somebody you should be able to talk to at the end of the phone. You should have a vet that you're registered with. Your local APHA might be a good place, if you know them and you can pick up the phone to them. As Ross said, there are advisors from SAC Consulting around the country. If they've got pig experience, they can be really useful to talk to. And there are other reputable organisations, British Pig Association, places like that. I've said don't believe everything you see online, and that is true, but there are some good websites out there, and I think it's just important to be aware of them and look in more than one place for advice. So I'm not going to recommend, that you just go to one particular website tonight, but I would say the NADIS website is really good. Look that up if you get a chance. It's got pig section and pig disease sections. The pig site tends to be quite good as well. I would look at both those sites when I'm looking up information online. There's a veterinary manual online called the MERC. And it's quite useful as well if you want to get a bit more technical. It's actually it used to be just a book form, and published for vets, but since they put one of the copies online, then it's really easy to access, and as long as you don't get too bogged down in the jargon, it's quite handy. And there's some of the smallholder sites like the Accidental Smallholder are really pretty useful as well, and I've got some of their information in my talks tonight. Don't know if any of you have ever heard of something called a health plan. So a health plan would be something that's really commonly done in the livestock industry, more often for sheep flocks or for cattle herds, to be honest. But it's if you have a mini health plan for your pigs, that might be a good way forward. It means that you can put them together in a number of ways, but basically you look at your holding and how you do things currently and what treatments you're using and how good your biosecurity is, and you consider all the different things about your holding, and then you look at how you might improve those, and then you might choose to lay your health plan down in terms of a year's calendar. So for the preventative treatments, they come up in the calendar, and the grouping or the regrouping or moving buildings or when you're cleaning buildings or worming animals or whatever it is, that can be in the calendar. And then you would also agree with your vet that you'll record losses, and if you're a breeding herd, that's really useful, not to just have a chalk up on the wall when you've lost a piglet out of a litter, but you actually keep a record. And then, if you're seeing mortality rates that are too high, you know when to intervene. So a health plan is good. And quarantine and biosecurity, be aware of what you could be buying or letting in, and I'll talk a bit more about that this evening. So in terms of daily health checks, what are you looking for? I don't know whether you have pets as well, but a lot of this is just or kids actually, because a lot of this is common sense, and it would be what you were looking for either in your children or one of your pets, and you probably do it as second nature with them, or if you've got other livestock, you're maybe really used to doing this. But look out for things. Pigs are quite social animals, and so if one pig is right over the other side of the pen or right over the other side of the paddock and not very interested in the rest of the group, you need to just go and check what's going on there. It might have an easy explanation. Maybe there's something really interesting it's found, but if it's a bit miserable and it doesn't move away quickly, then that might be one of the first signs. And then, just that listlessness that you might see. You need to look out for things like a swollen navel or an udder and joints, and then respiratory disease often presents, particularly in a group of pigs. You become aware of it because you're hearing, you go into a building, for example, and you hear an increased level of sneezing. You're just standing and listening to what your pigs are doing, and they're moving around, and there's a bit of grunting, but there's more sneezing than you heard in the last few weeks, and that just brings it to your attention. If there's individuals that have got really a bit more poorly, then you might start to see rapid or irregular breathing and coughing or panting. Pigs can get heat stress, so panting is something you could look out for, and shivering as well, same as with people. When you're running a temperature, we call it pyrexic as a veterinary term, then you might shiver along with that. And equally, piggies can get cold, and they would choose to huddle if they're chilly. Piglets would choose to huddle up together if they're cold, but if they can't put it right just by huddling, which is a natural instinct, then they might get to the point of shivering. And the list goes on there with bits and pieces that you might be looking for, and you can, they all make sense, don't they? Lameness, loss of body condition, scour, that's diarrhea, or the other side, constipation, poor appetite, and so on. So they're common sense things, but if you're really new to pig keeping, you haven't done it before, having a wellness checklist at first, just to get you in the habit of looking for everything, can be really handy. So, you've checked the respiratory system, and you've checked the legs, the ambulatory system, can it walk, how are its feet? You've checked the gastrointestinal system, as in, is it maintaining its body condition? And does it have diarrhea or scour? You're looking at all the different body systems, but there's particular signs you're looking out for. So in terms of going out to the paddock and saying good morning to your pigs, you need to check them every single day. It's really important, just from the point of view of, do they have sufficient water there? Has their water supply dried up for any reason? That kind of thing. But you need to check them every day for their own health as well. If they're pigs that you're not giving ad lib food to, so you restrict feed them, i.e. you're feeding them, once or twice a day, then when they see you, they'll know that it's breakfast time. And so therefore you would expect them to be up and keen and vocal and come charging over, or at least ambling over, because you're probably the source of food. If you need to get them up, then make them stand up and check they're moving freely. And that's more if they're ad lib, they may not charge over to you, and they may not come. So you might need to get them up. As I said, check the water supply is plentiful and that it's clean. I don't know if most of you are rearing outside or inside, but one of the things that can happen in commercial pig production is that the animals are on nipple drinkers that come out as just silver. They're about this long, silver things that, like a hamster would have on the end of its bottle in a cage. That's the nipple thing with a ball at the end. And they'll go and they'll drink from that. But the trouble is that if the water supply stops or gets a blockage, unless you're being observant about the pig behavior, you may miss it, because obviously you can't see that there's water in a trough with that kind of water delivery system. For ad lib feeders, check that the feeders have enough feed and that it's fresh. Pigs love the food when it's fresh, and they tend to not be as keen on it once it starts going off a bit. And in terms of, are they well, is their feeding rate normal? So knowing what's normal for your animals is really important. If that particular one is the really lively one that always gets up and runs over to you in the morning, whereas that one's a bit slower to get up, and that's just normal for those two individuals. And if you've got smaller number of pigs that you're keeping, then that's the sort of thing you might know about them. Okay, so this might be perfectly normal for this guy, and that's what I'm pleased to see. He's really interested, he's bright and alert, he's come over to you, he's got no discharges, his eyes are bright, he's got nothing around his face crusting, his nose is, apart from mud, is looking nice and clean, and so on, and he's bright and alert and interested, and he's able to get up with his front feet on that fence, so he must be getting about all right as well. So, there's lots of signs there, even just from that photo of a well pig. In terms of understanding whether or not they're keeping body condition, I don't know if this is something, if you have sheep, you may well be doing this already with your sheep, and it's something you can also do with your pigs. So body condition scoring, or abbreviated to BCS, can be used for sows and boars, and it's really useful. It makes sure that your pig is in good health so that its welfare is good. It makes sure that they're growing, or that you're able to tell whether they're growing, and growing at a decent rate. If you don't have weighing facilities, then the next best thing is to get good at body condition scoring them and keep a record. And it makes you able to check as well that your feeding levels are appropriate. So pigs are growing as you would expect, or if they're your sows, that they're maintaining their weight and that their weight isn't going down to unacceptable levels. So you're you're putting a hand on their backs, you're putting a hand on their sides to look for their ribs, and you're looking, once you've done their backbone, then you move back. I presume you can see me, but here I am doing hand actions. You move over their backs down towards the tail, and then you're looking to see the pin bones, the bones that make up the pelvis, but you can feel them just either side of the spine at the back end. And And if a pig's very thin, then from its rear end, it will look a bit like number one there. And you can see that you will be easily able to feel both the animal's backbone and its pin bones. Those are the two knobbles at the left and right of the bit that's the spine sticking right up at the top. So, and you would also be able to feel its ribs very easily. And you go through from emaciated to thin to number 3, which is ideal, where there's just good cover over the backbone and the pin bones, and you'll barely be able to feel them. But by the time you get to number 4 and number 5, which is fat and overly fat, then you won't be able to palpate them, i.e. you won't be able to feel them at all. So yeah, just get good at it. You only get good by practice. You can find information, if you need more than I've given you, online about body condition scoring. There's scores for all sorts of things. You know, you can score your dog or your rabbit just as much as you can score your pigs and your sheep. So you'll be able to find something species appropriate to guide you, and just get good at it and know how your different pigs feel. For example, I tend to keep my dog quite skinny, and I have a hand on him on a regular basis to see whether he's gained or lost. And you do get really used to doing it, and you're quite quickly able to pick up whether they've put on or lost weight. So I think, is there a poll here, Ross?
Yes, there is. I'm just away to launch it. So they go in order. The top left is A. Top
Yes. Right is B.
right B. Bottom left C. Bottom right D.
Thank you.
So
Do apologise.
So that's it. So if you can select one which you think is the ideal condition, which pig is in ideal condition? So we'll just give it a half a minute. At the moment, everyone is saying, oh, I wouldn't say in case anyone does go up to want to say something else. Okay. They've all got it. They're all saying,
They all know.
they all know.
Good stuff, guys.
There they are. Oh, this is
Pig
interesting.
experts.
We had one in B. But that's interesting, B.
Wow.
If we go to it.
Yeah.
So I'll hide that and that'll let you
Yes. So can you see my pointer, Ross? Can you see? I
yeah,
don't know whether
I
you.
can see it.
Yeah. So this is B. So somebody said maybe this one was in ideal condition, and this is C, which most of you thought was in ideal condition. So I would agree this one's in ideal. This is just a very fat pig. Now, it might be more normal for that breed, if that makes sense, or that animal's just got really old and put on weight over the years. But in terms of an animal that's fit to, to walk around on those legs, if you wanted to keep them for a good number of years and to have good feet and so on, it's going to be much harder, especially if you're wanting to breed from a pig, just one that's in so over conditioned. It's going to make life a lot harder on their joints, and you're more likely to get arthritis, and their hearts are going to struggle, just like with an obese person. So this piggy here, I'm glad you didn't think it was in ideal condition, but you can see the point about emaciation, or at least thinness, can't you? That the ribs are really, obvious even to the naked eye, and if you put a hand on the side of that animal, you would feel its ribs, you'd feel its backbone, and you'd feel its pin bones, and you maybe saw down there was something going on. I'll speak about that later. So this piggy though is interesting because this is a more old-fashioned breed. I'm extremely suspicious actually that this is a stuffed pig that is tied up in a museum. But anyway, you get my point that this is a more old-fashioned breed, and as a result, they do tend to be leaner when they're at an ideal rate. So ideal weight, sorry. So yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it? That it does depend partly on breed as to what's ideal as well. Okay, so as I said when Ross and I were having a chat before the start, good welfare goes hand in hand with good health, and pigs that are bullied often get poorly as well. So this pig's been bullied, and probably then its stress levels will be increased, and it's more likely to get sick as well. And all these scratches and cuts over the skin are because other pigs are picking on this one. Outside, I think you do tend to see less vices. So if you're producing pigs outdoors, you're more likely to have decreased problems with the kind of bullying or tail chewing or biting that you see on indoor pig production when pigs don't have a lot to do, particularly if they're on slats. When they're on straw, even if they're indoors, when they're on straw, they tend to be a bit more occupied as well because they've got nice bedding to play with. So we've said that stress helps, but getting the right diet really helps as well. Deficiencies in diet can result in death and disease, and different growth stages of pig need differently formulated diet, which makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you would know as in a human being, if they were breastfeeding a baby, they need a different diet to a child that's growing up, for example. You know, when we're at different stages of life, we need different constituents in our diet, and the same goes for growing animals as well. So if you've got lactating sows, you probably want to feed them a lactating sow ration, and if you've got growers, you want to look at a grower ration. It's usually much easier to avoid deficiencies if you're buying in a ration rather than making it up at home. But if you are making it up at home, then good advice from someone that knows how to formulate a diet, and a bit of a hand with that is very much to be recommended. An example of one of the problems that pigs are particularly prone to is vitamin E and selenium deficiency, and they get something called mulberry heart disease, which affects their hearts, and you get degeneration of the heart muscle fibers, and it can also affect their liver as well. So just so you know, for any animal, if they're not getting enough calories or so on, it can be a problem. But there are specific diseases to pigs as well, and they are more prone to gastric ulcers, particularly if they're stressed. And a fine milled diet can aggravate that too. Okay, so health planning is something that you should really think about, and you can write up a health plan in conjunction with your vet or another health advisor that you can get access to. It would be something that you'd want to look at each year and review, see how your production's been going, see what you want to change. And in your health plan, you'll have your planned routine treatments and actions through the year, along with contingencies. So, you know, if a pig was sick, you might have agreed with your vet, you know, that if it had respiratory disease, you would do this as a first line treatment. And if the animal didn't improve within 24 hours, then you would be on the phone to them and they'd be coming out to do a visit. So, or if they're farrowing and they're having trouble with farrowing, or you think they might be, you leave them a certain amount of time and then you try and intervene. And if that's no good, then you get the vet out, that kind of thing. You want to find a vet that is interested in pigs and interested in smallholders as well. So phone around, don't be embarrassed to ask questions, find out who in the practice has specific interests in different livestock, find out if there's a local practice that does have a pig, well, not necessarily a pig specialist, but somebody who's an interest, who would like to work alongside you, and just look round and see, ask your neighbours who have pigs and ask who they're using and so on. I don't know how many of you are already using medicines for your livestock, but I would say as a pig keeper, then you should look on yourself as like a first responder. So in the event of an emergency, then you know how to give first aid to your pigs and you know when to get the vet. And then consulting the vet for advice and using the products that they're allowed to prescribe is then the next important step. So only use products that are licensed for use in pigs. If your animals are going to go into the food chain, then you need to do that or you can get yourself into trouble. And you also need to be recording the use of your medicines too. And you need a medicines book to do that in. You need to store your medicines safely and securely. So you don't want them just on top of a dusty old shelf in the corner of the shed. You don't want anybody else to be able to get access to them. And you don't want them, you know, if you've got kids coming about as well or anything like that, then you particularly want them to be somewhere safe and secure. And you also want it to be somewhere cool, because there will be storage instructions on those bottles, and you want them to be working. So you need to store them the way that you're supposed to store them. Medicines have a meat withdrawal period. I presume you know about that, but basically, if you're putting medicine into an animal, then and the drug is a licensed drug and licensed for that species, then it will have instructions about how long you have to withhold that meat from the food chain. And equally with cattle, you know, if it's a milking cow, how long you would have to withhold the milk from the food chain. So you need to know about that and ask your vet if they're giving you drugs, ask them about the meat withdrawal. Make sure you have a way to dispose of the medicines and a container for sharps as well, or you know, you're able to pass those on back to your vet as soon as possible. And prevention is better than cure. So think about the vaccines you might want to use, monitor for parasites, and have routine treatments if you need them in your health plan. Yeah, diagnosis is best left to a vet. Not all diseases are caused by bacteria, just like with us when we think that the common, you know, when we go to the doctors and we're like, well, why didn't he give us an antibiotic? That's what I need. Sometimes they know better than us, and you know, it's viral and we don't need an antibiotic for this disease, and the same thing can be true in pigs. But good quality advice from experienced folk is really, really useful. So SQPs, it stands for suitably qualified persons, and basically you can get authority to sell some non-prescription medicines in agricultural stores. So they might be giving you advice on worming and so on. And again, you need to make sure, you know, that they have an interest in pigs and they've got experience. So, you know, the same as when you're looking for a vet with an interest, look out for an SQP who knows about the drugs that they're selling you. Pig keepers with good quality operations and years of experience are just gold dust. So, you know, if you can be in contact with folk around you that know what they're doing, then that's really handy as well. So parasites, someone was asking earlier about them. They're a hazard for all pigs, but for those kept in more extensive conditions and in permanently occupied areas that are never washed, parasites are more likely to build up. And so then you get significant worm populations that can become a real problem for your animals. All worms affecting pigs are host specific, and they have a life cycle where the adults that are inside your piggies produce the eggs, and the eggs come out onto the paddock and they hatch into larvae outside of the host animal, and these larvae then go through some transitions, and then they re-enter the pig and they progress through to the adult stage again. Some migration can happen in the body during that life cycle. So with some of the different parasites, they'll go through the lungs or the liver. So on the right hand side of my slide there, you can see a milk spot liver, and that's because one of the migrating parasites has damaged the liver as it's passed through it, and it's known as milk spot. And if you're getting information back from the abattoir that you've got a problem with the livers and there's milk spotting there, then that's what that is all about. So there are various gut and lung worms. So the strong isles are in the large intestine and stomach. The roundworms, they're also in the gut. The whipworm and the tapeworms are too. And then the lungworm is, you don't need to know, you know, all these details. And you can come back to this lecture as a resource, and you can go back to other websites as well that will have this information. But it's just to give you a feel for it at the minute. If you're monitoring for worms, then this is a worm egg under the microscope. So that's what folk will be doing for you. If you're collecting feces samples, you're collecting poo samples and sending it in, then people will be looking down a microscope to look for the eggs, and they'll be counting the eggs, and then you'll get information back about how many eggs are there and do they have a heavy, moderate, or a low burden. The abattoir might give you feedback as well for monitoring. So you might be hearing things like you've got milk spot liver, and then you'll know that you've got ascarids there, and growth rates as well. So whilst this isn't a real way to monitor for parasites, in that growth rates can be affected by what you're feeding and other things that are going on. If you're aware that growth rates aren't right, then one of the possible causes of not fast enough growth rate or ill thrift can be parasites. So it's one of the things that you might think about. And if growth rate starts being affected, considering your worming strategy or considering their worm burden might be one of the things you want to remember. Immunity to worms doesn't develop in terms of the strong isles, the nematodes in the gut. So unlike in sheep, where they tend to suppress their worms once they become adults, that doesn't happen with the piggies. And so the challenge can become extreme and they can just become overwhelmed. So you can see, if you've got a very limited amount of ground, that your ground can become pig sick. So one of the simple methods of control, if you're not a breeding herd, or you're wondering whether or not to become a breeding herd, is consider buying in your pigs as weaners and running an all-in, all-out system with regular cleaning and resting of paddocks in between your batches. So if you buy in worm-free weaners, you quarantine them, and then you rest your paddocks between. You may well be able to control worms on your holding, and that'll stop you getting the problem in the first place, hopefully. And you can see then how important quarantine becomes. And you do need to monitor what's going on as well, just to make sure that it stays worm free. There's licensed wormers for pigs, and there's two classes. Wormers are really confusing drugs in that there are lots of different ones available, especially if you have more than one breed of livestock. Then you'll find that there's all sorts available for sheep and cattle as well. So there's the benzimidazoles and the avermectins are the licensed classes for pigs, and then within that there are some oh well, here, let's have a look at my next slide. There are a drug that is active to kill worms in your piggies. It has a generic name, so that's the name that it would be called by any company at all. But once a company starts marketing that drug, it gives it its trade name to sell it under. So an example in people would be Calpol for kids is actually paracetamol, but the trade name is Calpol. And you can give the benzimidazoles orally, and you can give that a number of ways. You put it into the food and it can be formulated with the ration. You can top dress the food, or it can go in via the water. Whereas the avermectins, you can only formulate it into the ration if you're going to give it in feed. And the doramectin, the Dectamax, is injectable. And you can see I've got comments about what it's active against as well. The thing with the avermectins is that if you have a problem with external parasites too, it will treat with those. So Anthelmintics are one of many licensed veterinary medicines, and licensed veterinary medicines come in different categories. So the Anthelmintics are prescription only medicines, so POM, and VPS. This tells you who can prescribe it. So it can be prescribed by a vet, a pharmacist, or one of those SQPs that I mentioned, one of those people who have undergone training in order to be able to sell small categories of licensed drugs. So it can be prescribed by these folks, and if the person prescribing it is going to deviate from what the license says you would use it for, then it needs to be a vet doing that. The pharmacist or the SQP can't do that. As I've already said, you need to record your uses, you need to know about meat withdrawals, and you need to know how to dispose of any unused products. And that goes for all the veterinary medicines, but the example is relevant in this case because avermectins are really toxic to aquatic life. So if you don't get rid of that particular drug safely, then, and you let it go into the watercourse, then you might be causing a real problem to the aquatic life, but you're getting yourself in trouble too. You might get chased up by SEPA. So worming strategies in pigs depends on what stages of growth and so on, or production stage you're at. And I'm not going to talk through all these. Some of this is here as a resource for you in order that you can come back to it. But there are all sorts of websites as well that will give you different recommendations for worming, and you just need to be careful whose advice you take, and make sure that you get good advice. And again, this is probably the stage at which you want to go and talk to your vet, or if you know another health advisor who you really trust and will give good pig advice, be talking to them about how you want to go about this, depending on your specific holding and what production stages you've got. So breeding, you can see that for growing pigs there's 3 options depending on whether you're infested or whether you're using an all-in-all-out production strategy. Whereas with your breeding herds, again, there's different options, but it's 7 this time, depending on what bit of the production system you're talking about. So it becomes more complicated once you go into a breeding herd. One of the other common diseases that you may see in your younger animals is coccidiosis. So if you're seeing animals that are thin and young and scouring, yes, it could be worms, but equally, piglets are 7 to 10 days. It's much more likely to be something else like coccidiosis or rotavirus or something like that. So cocci is an internal parasite. You see it under the microscope and you can pick it up in the feces if it's there. It tends to be around in the environment, so it's more common outdoors. If the sows get their udder contaminated, then they may be picking it up out of contaminated ground, and then the piggies go and suck her and they pick up the cocci. Or if there's just been lots of contamination and wet weather and the beds aren't renewed between batches, then it just gets built up in the environment, and so they're exposed to a big dose of it. Cocci is something that they will develop an immunity to. So it's fine to contact cocci in the environment. It's almost inevitable unless you're on really clean slats. But you want them to not get a huge dose of it to start with. You want them to get a low level of it. They'll be exposed to it. The body recognizes, mounts an immune response, and then they start to control the levels that are in them. If what they get is a huge dose to start with, then they get into the gut. They go through their developmental stages. They all hatch out of the gut wall all at once, and there's lots and lots of them because they've had such a big, as it were, dose of cocci. And then as a result, there's enormous gut damage, and your piggies get really sick because their guts can't function normally anymore. So that's why control depends on things like hygiene and infection level and allowing immunity to develop. Some of good health may depend on whether or not you're going to vaccinate your animals, and there are absolutely hundreds of vaccines available for pigs, and it really depends on what you're doing. Again, your production system is really going to suggest to you what you might want to vaccinate for. So when I was looking at the recommendation for smallholder pigs, these are the DEFRA recommendations. They say that vaccinate against erysipelas if you're going to start somewhere. Whatever pig reduction you're doing, consider erysipelas vaccination. And erysipelas is a bacteria, and it can cause things like heart problems, and you see it through classic diamond red blotches on the skin. We'll have there's a slide of this later on, and it can spread to people, so that's another good reason to control it in your pigs. If your pigs can go outside, then vaccinating against a bug called Clostridia is also something you might want to consider. We see this in cattle and sheep as well. There's a number of different clostridial bacteria, and they can cause different manifestations of disease. So quite often they will cause sudden death in one way or another. And the spores of Clostridia are in the soil. So if you're going to have your pigs outside, and you may never have a clostridial problem, but on the other hand, if they contact those spores and then those spores cause disease in the animals, it may well present as an outbreak of sudden deaths, and that's not terribly handy and will impact your finances, so it may be worthwhile. And if you're breeding, parvovirus is one to consider. Biosecurity. I wonder if you know about this concept. It's really, well, you see at the right hand side of this slide, this is the most succinct way to explain it. Biosecurity is a set of measures designed to protect a property from the entry and spread of pests and diseases. Farm biosecurity is your responsibility and that of every person visiting or working on your property. And you know what? I think this makes a lot more sense to us now that we're also clued up at the minute about coronavirus. You know, if you were saying home biosecurity, is designed to protect your family against the entry and spread of coronavirus in your household, and it's your responsibility and everybody coming into your household. That would be quite meaningful to us at the minute, wouldn't it? We're not letting other folk into our houses. We're careful about if we have signs of ill health, we're careful about those people, and there's all sorts of things we do to try and stop being infected with coronavirus. And the same goes for your pig holding and stopping diseases coming into your pigs. So the most likely thing to bring diseases from the outside into your pigs, the most likely thing is incoming pigs, because they're really good carriers for pig disease, unsurprisingly. And so when pigs come in, quarantining them is really important. And 30 days is a suggested quarantine period. But if you had a health plan, that would be something that was written into your health plan. And you would have separate housing for them and separate equipment for them. And you might choose to either wash all your clothing down between, you dealing with those pigs and dealing with the other pigs, and you might do them last in terms of feeding and stuff each day. Yep, so all sorts of things you can do to make sure there's a really effective quarantine situation for your pigs. But there is a question mark there where it says shows. So if you're taking your animals out to shows and they're meeting lots and lots of other animals out with your holding, does that then mean you need to quarantine those incomers again? And yeah, it probably does actually if you're going to be really thorough, but it's not that handy. So yeah, it's just something to think about. So if it's not the pigs bringing in the disease, then another good way is to let people carry in disease. So they can carry in disease if they've had their wellies on in their holding, and then they come to you with things on their boots or on their boiler suit or on their clothes, their jeans or whatever. So when your neighbours come to you, provide them with your clothing. I mean, I don't actually mean give them your clothes. I mean, have a set aside sets of clothing for visitors. You may want to go as far as shower and changing. The big commercial pig units, that does happen. Some of those places around Aberdeenshire that I go to, I have to change out of my clothes on a clean side of the changing area. I will climb over a bench into a shower. I take a shower. I'm allowed to take my glasses through, but I have to wash them in the shower. And then on the other side, I put their clothing on, and then I go out around their pig herd. There's not loads like that, but there's a good few. If people are coming in onto your holding and you're giving them your wellies and getting them to put a boiler suit on, get them to boot dip as they go into different parts of the holding. Food is a really important way that disease can get into the pigs, particularly as we're thinking about African swine fever at the minute. So if people are eating food on your premises, if you've got a contractor in to do some repairs and he's eating a bacon sandwich, then make sure that he is not chucking away the waste from his sandwich just out of the window of the van or something. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? But that has happened, and disease has spread that way. So it's just a really important thing to think about. If you've got a canteen area and everybody is expected to eat in the canteen area and dispose of any waste in the bin in there, it keeps things safer. And signage at the boundary as well. You might have people who walk, there may be walkers that go past on a route regularly past your holding. So signing that you don't want people to walk through that pig paddock, and signing as well that please don't feed them any scraps or any of your food. Please don't feed the pigs. That's really important too. If you're transporting pigs, then you need to clean and disinfect the vehicles within 24 hours of unloading. Deliveries and feed. Think about who's coming onto your premises. We've covered the incoming pigs. We've covered the incoming people, visitors, your workers as well, actually, not just visitors, but your workers too. We're thinking now about who else comes to the property. So people coming to deliver stuff. Does your postie drive through the pig area of your holding? Does the feed company, where do they deliver to? Do they have to drive through your holding to deliver the feed and then drive out again? Is there a way that you can put where they're going to deliver the feed on the side that's away from the pig buildings so that they don't have to drive through the site and be bringing their dirty tyres onto your holding? In terms of other animals that aren't pigs, deterring birds and keeping vermin out of your holding is important as well, as far as you can. Dispose of your fallen stock legally, and have a sick pen or sick area. That's really important. You know, if you haven't thought of that and then you've got a sick pig and you're having to set that up in a hurry, that's not very handy. Know where you're going to put them when they're poorly. Have it away from the other animals. Don't just make it a dark, dingy, soggy corner, though. Make it somewhere that is going to encourage them to get back to good health. And have your drug storage, you know, somewhere to hand so that you don't end up leaving bottles of drugs just on the side near the sick pen, because that's where you want it. And your record book as well, somewhere that's easy to access so that you can record the drugs that are being given. And there's things to think about your boundaries as well, your fencing, your water courses. And actually, I've given you a link there to the NADIS website because there's some really good stuff there about biosecurity. I don't know if you've heard about African swine fever, but it's making a massive impact at the minute on the worldwide pig industry. They think that it may actually kill half of the Asian pig population. Isn't that commercial pig population? It's just incredible. It's just, you know, you can't even begin to imagine the amount of financial impact that African swine fever is having. It's a disease that causes deaths in pigs, and it can cause other signs as well, like abortions and so on. But you know, if you start to get lots of animals dying unexpectedly, the alarm bell should definitely ring. That's not one way where you wait a few hours to see what happens next. You pick up the phone. And African swine fever is a virus, and there is a risk of the minute it's spreading to the UK, and it can come in food as well. So the virus can stay active in food products. And they think if it does come in, that may well be the way that it gets here in the end. They detected it last year, I think it was, in some illegally imported meat that somebody was trying to bring into Northern Ireland. And you know, it wasn't somebody who was a criminal bringing in a big batch of illegal meat. It was somebody, you know, it's so simple to do. You can go over to Europe and bring back some sausage, you know, some cured sausage or something. It might be something that simple that brings it back in. And unbeknownst to you, you're also bringing in the disease. You can find the current situation with African swine fever on the Scottish Government website. You can look in the notifiable disease section and see what's going on. But this is just a quick map of African swine fever in domestic pigs and wild boar since January 2018. It started over in the east. So the places where you can see the most dots and so on, you can imagine that's where it came from originally, but then it's been spreading west ever since, and we've started to get some little dots of it in some of outlying countries like the Czech Republic and so on, and it seems to be gradually edging across the way. Although it's traveling with wild boar, it's also traveling in the unexpected big jumps are quite often when something to do with humans, that they mistakenly do something and it allows it to spread. So for example, they think at one point in one of the countries there was army exercises and food waste got disposed of in woodlands, and then the wild boar accessed it, and so they picked up the disease from food waste. And again, some of the long distance lorry drivers, when they stop at the lorry parks and then dispose of what they've finished eating into bins there, and wild boar can get access to it, they think that's other ways that it's made a big jump. So that's why they think if it comes in, it's most likely to come in and there's some infected meat, and we just need to be really careful. Be aware of it. That's why I particularly mention contractors on your holding or anything like that. If people are eating around your pigs, it's not a good plan. And feeding food waste to pigs, you know, you just mustn't. There are things known as notifiable diseases, and they're rare, but you need to be aware that there is such a thing. And it's yet another reason to consult vets in the case of unknown illness, particularly sudden death. Keep an eye on the news, because you know, when there's a really big, you know, when foot and mouth disease came in 2007, you know, you heard about it on the news, didn't you? And if there's a really big notifiable disease outbreak, you will hear about it, but you don't particularly need to worry about them. You just need to be aware that there's certain things you shouldn't do, and the prime one of those is don't feed kitchen waste. Know they exist, and get in touch with your vet if you're concerned about illness. If there's pigs dying, unexpectedly and suddenly, if there's red blotches on your pigs and they seem ill, if they're running a temperature, if lots of them are all huddling together, these are all signs of nasty systemic disease, and they're probably times where you just need to pick up the phone to the vet. It might not be a notifiable disease, but it's in the list of possibilities, albeit a rare possibility in that case. Again, if you want to find out what the notifiable diseases are, the Scottish Government website has lists, and it lists them according to species, so you can go and look at the pig ones. As I said, it's important to have a sick area. Yeah, pigs do tend to bully the pen mates that they see aren't quite right, so they may end up being attacked if they're left in with their pen mates. Some conditions like piglet diarrhea, neonatal animals are very vulnerable, so it might look mild to start with, but they can get poorly very quickly as they get dehydrated. So you need to intervene fast in those cases. Like I said, you're a first responder, and it's important for you to know when first aid is going to be appropriate, or when you need to intervene with something, more, you need to take them to the doctor effectively, or to A&E, as it were. So observe the pig. If it's a slight lameness or a cut, leave it in the group and check it regularly. If they're really not right, take them out and put them in an isolation area. That's good as well, because it means it's not spreading to the other animals. By all means, observe them. If they're well enough to just keep an eye on them for an hour or two or a few hours and see what happens next, fair enough. But don't leave it till last thing in the day to ring the vet. Don't leave it till last thing on a Friday to ring the vet. If you're worried, at least pick up the phone and get some advice. You can send, quite often nowadays, we can send pictures remotely, can't we, or video or what have you. Just start the discussion and at least agree, how long you're going to monitor it for and when you'll call back or whatever it is. If your pig gets better, hooray! But reintroducing pigs to a group can be difficult. So just take care and take advice, because they can just be aggressive in terms of the social hierarchy for that particular pig. They can fall out of it because you've taken them out of the group, and when they get back they may need to re-establish that, and sometimes that includes some aggression. So whether or not you'll be able to introduce them, it might be tricky, and you need to take care. And the things you're providing in the sick area we've talked about already. So in terms of common diseases, what is there? Well, there's internal and external parasites, and we will move on to those, and then there's all these other lists of things, and I will mention them all briefly. I think the take-home message from this slide, with lots of text on it, is there are lots of things that cause diarrhea in piglets. Some of them are bacteria like E. coli, some of them are virus like rotavirus or coronavirus can as well, and some of them are parasites like Cocci. So there's all sorts of things, and those first three things are the common causes, and there are a list of less common ones too. You can get different signs. So if the diarrhea is a really horrible one and really severe, one of the first things you might see is dead piglets. It can kill them incredibly fast. They may get as far as scouring though, so you might see a watery diarrhea. And you know yourself, if we have diarrhea, we get dehydrated, we need to drink diaurolite. And the same thing with pigs. If they get dehydrated, if they get diarrhea, they might get dehydrated, and you see sunken eyes with dehydration, and the skin can maybe tent when you sort of pinch it. It takes longer to go down again. They feel awful, so they huddle up and they tuck up and they look dull, and they do look hairier as well. In terms of recovery from scour, because all the things are causing damage to the wall of the gut, which is where water and nutrients are absorbed, then for that all to get back to normal, the gut needs to heal. And gut damage takes quite some time to heal. And as a result, those piglets, if they had a bad scour, may not grow as well as the other piglets. And so you may see animals that are weaning at a lower weight and so on. There are some vaccinations. And the other thing to remember is that we can do things. We've already said prevention is better than cure. So vaccine is one of the ways we can step in. Stockmanship. So piggies getting a suck of colostrum is really super important. You know, mum is in contact with all these nasties in the environment before the pigs are born, and she's probably got immunity to them. If they're in her environment, her body will have an immunity, and as a result, when the colostrum's produced, the maternal antibodies will be put into the colostrum, and so when the pig sucks that colostrum, it's absolute gold dust. It's just full of all the bugs that are naturally in that pig's environment. It's like giving it a big dose of medicine. It's fantastic. So when your piglets are born, make sure that they're getting make sure they're kept warm, make sure there's no drafts, make sure they're in the absolute best condition to get up to a teat and latch on and get a really good suck, and doing that within a very short time of them being born, because if they get that colostrum, you just can't beat it, and they get a really good dose. Make sure they do get a good suck. And the environment's important, and so I said about drafts and so on, but also how hygienic it is. So yeah, temperature can make piglets less active, and as a result then you get less sucking, and then that means that they're either not getting colostrum, or as they get older they're just not getting good feeds, and as a result they're just not as strong as they should be, and they're more likely to get disease. So all those things can help with prevention. Sometimes treatment will include antibiotics, and that's why you need advice from a vet to know what it is that's causing it, and then to know what the appropriate treatment would be. And some scours don't. So cocci and rotavirus, those aren't bacterial, so you wouldn't need an antibiotic for them. And TLC can help. So, like I said, diaurolite, for example, there are oral rehydration fluids specifically for animals. I'm not telling you to give them diaurolite, but there's the equivalent for animals, and also keeping them warm and making sure they got cozy bedding. You can come back to look at these. These are some of the less common things. There's a porcine epidemic diarrhea, this bottom one, PED. It's rare, but it is notifiable in Scotland. But again, your vet would advise you if they thought you had that, and then you would notify it to the Scottish pig surveillance. Okie doke. External parasites. So we talked about the worms that are inside the guts of animals, of the pigs, but we haven't covered the external ones, and there's a variety that can cause problems: lice and mange, ticks, fleas, and biting insects. And there are various treatments available, and ways to control insects within your buildings if they're inside. So basically, if your piggies are itchy or scaly or spotty, they probably wouldn't be just thin, there would be other things going on, but if they are thin, then we said that one of the causes of thinness could be internal parasites. Equally, so could external parasites. So, just know what's normal for your pigs. If they suddenly start looking like they've got bites all over them, or they've got really thick, brown, crusty earwax that they didn't have before, then be aware that these could be signs of external parasites. And some of these can also spread to people. So if you start getting bites all over you as well, just remember that might be coming from one of those sources. I said that it's really important that pigs don't run out of water. Now, part of that is just because we all need water, don't we, on a regular basis. But you can see a disease. It occurs more commonly in pigs, and I think that's because in commercial pig production, the water source can dry up, like I described to you, and people don't realise for a while. So if they're without water for a period of time, and then they get the water supply back again, they can get, it's referred to as either salt poisoning or water deprivation, and you can see they just look miserable and dull. And by the way, pigs that aren't drinking tend to not eat. It tends to go hand in hand that if they drink well, they'll then go and find some food as well. So if they stop eating, check the water supply. Anyway, if they go back and they drink absolutely loads, then it causes an imbalance in their body, and you start to get swelling in the brain, and so you get nervous signs. So they press their head against the wall, and the pressure in there can mean that they go blind as well, and get other signs like fits. So if you're aware that your pigs have gone without water, because this often develops once the water comes back again, don't just rush and give them absolutely loads. Gradually reintroduce it and slowly rehydrate them. So yeah, just take care. You would take advice. I think you need to pick up the phone to your vet and just have a chat about it. Somebody asked about, do you check your pig's feet? Well, you know, this is what pig feet look like underneath. Yes, they are a bit, I suppose, like sheep's feet in that they're cloven. And yeah, you just need to check that they're not getting too long in the toe, that they're being worn down well. That'll depend what surface they're walking around on, and also that they're not being worn down too much and they're not developing ulceration. If your pig's really overweight, but just because of the genetics of some pigs makes them more likely to go lame, then you may see lameness more. And your vet can examine and advise, because sometimes it needs somebody to get in there with some pain relief. And if it's a bacterial cause of lameness, then it may be that they need some antibiotics, or, you know, it just needs discussion and diagnosing well. If you're getting recurrent problems, then it might be problems that you've got with your surfaces that can be used to prevent the problem developing. And this is all sorts of pictures of some indoor commercial pigs and the various things that are going wrong with their feet. So you can see there, and their knees actually, you can see there that they've got they've been down on their knees, and they've got some callousing there. They've got on their hind limbs, there's some ulceration here on the hind limbs. There's swelling on this one. There's swelling on the hocks here. You know, you see all sorts of different things. This is long toes. This is a problem with the underside of the foot. So's this. You can get this, you know, sort of white line disease developing. And again, you've got problems here with the accessory digit. So know what's normal. You know, young pigs' feet, recently brought in healthy pigs, are going to look pretty normal. And you'll quickly get used to what is normal. And you need to be checking them, yes, to make sure that they stay good. Ross, do you have a poll?
Yes, I do. I'm just going to launch it. I was just to say that's an hour that we've been on an hour, Hannah.
Wow.
It was just to say there's quite a few questions coming through, so we're not far off, are we?
No, we're not far off at all.
Yeah. So this is the poll talking about hernias in your pigs.
I was interested to know what you guys have actually seen yourselves. I don't know, you know, I've got this audience of 30 of you out there, and I don't know whether you've got pigs, whether you've had them for a long time, what sort of diseases you're seeing. So this is just a first step in there. But have any of you, Ross, I can't see the slide. What did you actually write on it?
Have you ever seen hernias in your pigs? Hernia is a swelling, large swelling under the skin in the abdominal area.
Excellent, thank you.
So I'll just close the poll now and share it. So yeah, quite a few have seen it. Yeah, a few have seen hernias.
Interesting. So yeah, you can get it coming through in the inguinal area, which is you know, in the hind limb area there, and basically it can be fat, or then the trouble is it can go from being just fat to being the guts that can come down through a little hole that is from the abdomen into this under the skin area. This has happened, it can happen in the navel area, it can happen around the scrotum as well. So it's something to watch out for. Sometimes it's all right if you can surgically correct them, but it's probably not worthwhile. And you know, it's suffering for the pig if it has to undergo a surgery. Early slaughter or culling prior to it reaching a really big size, or prior to the guts getting down in there too, is probably the best approach. And if it's occurring at a higher incidence than you expect, then you may want to look into whether there's any supplier issues implicated. The other few bits and pieces I was going to mention is that pigs can get sunburn, sunstroke, and heat stress. They don't have wool like a sheep does, well, apart from this guy here. So they can get sunburn if you put them out, and you know, we're lucky enough in Scotland to get sun. One of the preventions is that you can have shade or you can have a wallow. So again, I was interested, who out there's got outdoor pigs and has a wallow?
Okay, I'll launch the poll. This is for outdoor only. I forgot to say it's just a basic yes or no. If you have outdoor pigs, do you provide them with a wallow? So they're just voting as we speak. Well, this is it. Yeah, people are very much aware of it. Or a few people.
Excellent.
So there you go. Someone has come up and said no. So that's good. If they're
Yeah.
going to learn about
You know,
walrus today, so that's
yeah,
good.
absolutely. So, an area that I think the previous slide had the suggested measurements. You can get artificial ones that you just put some earth in and some water in, and it's just massive big plastic thing. I've seen them on some of the commercial holdings outdoors, but you can also create one. So these pigs really do enjoy it. You can see from the picture it's a good thing for welfare, but it's also a good thing for prevention of sunburn. If they've got a nice coating of mud, then they're much less likely to get sunburn. And I've seen sunburnt pigs, and yourself, if you've got burn, it's really uncomfortable. There are loads of infectious diseases, and we've already talked about the things that you can do, to prevent it. So hygiene and colostrum and the vaccines and all those sorts of things. There's lots of common sense stuff for you to keep your pigs in good health. And then if you unfortunately do get to the point where you've got disease, then as we've said, go consult your vet. Respiratory disease is a problem. It tends to be a problem more in indoor pigs. Just they're all sharing the same airspace. It can be quite dusty, and you see all sorts of different causes. Bordetella is a bacteria, and it causes irritation up in the nose. Pneumonia, it can be both bacterial and viral. So swine flu can cause viral pneumonia, or you can have things like Pasteurella or mycoplasma. The things to look out for that would spread, that would indicate that you've got respiratory disease. And whilst you can sometimes alter the management because you might not have your ventilation right, your stocking rates, or maybe your straw's been really, really dusty this time, there are things that you need your vet to intervene with as well. There are lots of bacterial bugs that cause infections. I just mentioned the Pasteurella and mycoplasma. Clostridial disease, you can go to some extent to prevent if you're vaccinating, and the same with the erysipelas. So again, there are lots of bacterial. Here's just, if you see lesions like this on your pig, these, they're not all totally diamond shaped, but they tend to be occasionally classically diamond shaped. If you're seeing red blotchy skin like this, just remember that erysipelas can cause it, and it can cause, if they get erysipelas, it can cause all these things, and it can spread into people. Zoonotic means it's a disease that spreads between animals and people, and equally between people and animals. You can give it to pigs too. If you've got a breeding herd, then it's possible that you'll see mastitis, and you just need to be aware of the signs of that so that you know if there's a problem. So your sow might be poorly, her udder area won't look normal, but she also won't probably be producing enough milks for your piglets, and she won't want to let them suck either. So if she keeps getting up and won't let them suckle, and the piglets are starting to look hungry, then that's just something that you need to be aware of. That might be the problem. There are a number of viral diseases. Again, you can vaccinate against parvo. Some of them are really important because they're notifiable. So these are the sort of rare ones, but you need to be aware that if you start to see blistering around the feet like this, around the nose here, that could be a sign of something notifiable, and you just need to know when to pick up the phone. I already mentioned to you what a zoonotic disease is. It can spread from animals to people and from people to animals, and there are some of those that exist in pigs. There's quite a lot of examples here. So if they got diarrhea from salmonella, then that can spread to you as well. So just don't worry about it, but be sensible and be aware, because if your pig is scouring, then this is on the list of possibilities. So be really careful with your hand hygiene. There you go, Ross. Thank you ever so much for listening. Sorry if I went on a bit long, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Well, thank you very much, Hannah. That was exceptionally good. We covered a lot there, as we say. Lots of questions coming in, so we'll get straight to them. I'll just quickly We've got one based on Isle of Skye. What's the biggest health concerns for the West Coast?
I would think probably that just the things, the parasites, and I would think actually in terms of pigs, the biggest health concerns are the things that are they're fairly universal. So things like the parasites, the worms, and the things that you can vaccinate against, those are all going to arise across the country. The only thing that I can think of in this country that sort of tends to be particularly regional is things like liver fluke in cattle and sheep. And there's nothing that springs to mind particularly about the pigs that we would particularly see on one side than the other. I suppose Ross, it tends to be more affected by your methods of production. So are you indoors or outdoors rather than are you on the east or the west?
Yeah. Of course, on the West Coast, the wind blows all disease to the east. That's the way you look at it. And you spoke a lot about wormer, but just regarding the likes of if sows are pregnant, would you get that advice from obviously from the actual wormer on its? Is there any advice?
So it will say you need to look at what wormer you're using and whether or not there are any. It's called contraindications. So yes, you'll get that advice on the wormer. Equally, you can actually go online and look at the different details of the veterinary drugs online. There's something called NOAH, NOAH, and they're an organization that do the data compendium of all the different veterinary drugs. So if you go and look up, if you type in NOAH veterinary drug to Google, I think that you probably would come up with, it will say NOAH compendium. You'll know you find the right thing. And then you can put in any of the drugs and it will bring up the details of them, and under the contraindication section will be where you find, should this be used in pregnant animals or not. But to be honest, the person who's supplying you with that drug should also know that information. So it's something, or they should be able to help you to find it at least when they're supplying the drug to you. So ask the question, make them aware of your situation and what animals you're wanting to treat, and be careful.
Excellent. This is one on advice on trimming and managing tusks. That any advice would be welcome. This is from County Durham. This is Liz in County Durham, and they do coonies.
Liz, in a past life, I used to work with mini pigs, and they got the most enormous tusks, the male mini pigs, and they would be so friendly. They'd come in. I don't know if your coonies are the same, but they would come dashing up to you to greet you, and they would come and they would rub their heads like this on your leg, and you had to be so careful that you didn't get a tusk up your leg because they're ever so sharp. I don't know that I have a lot of advice. I haven't really had to deal with pigs with tusks in a veterinary capacity. Apart from that, we were just careful and we didn't, trim them or anything like that. And teeth are very sensitive. So I think you need to take. I'm sorry that I can't tell you more, and I'll very happily go and look it up for you and come back to you with more information. But I'm not sure what they do routinely in places that are dealing regularly with smallholder pigs and tusks. I'll write it down as one of the things I need to ask a colleague. Will you, Ross, is there a way to get an email address so that we can contact her back? Lovely.
Yeah, we've got everyone's emails. Yeah.
Fab.
That's great. I've seen, maybe they used to use the wire saw.
Like you would for taking horns off. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have too. The reason that I'm hesitating is that any teeth have a sensitive pulp cavity. So things that we did in the past with various bits and pieces aren't always smiled on these days. Have you seen it done recently, Ross?
That was quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would just want to double check what was smiled on these days.
Yeah, very much. Can you advise regarding, or you help me here, Hannah, trichinella? TRICHINELLA.
Yeah. What? Can they be any more specific? What
Is it
what
T?
advice were they looking for?
Yeah,
Is that,
they
sorry?
might come back.
It's a parasite.
Right, that's right. They might come back with more. So, but
Yeah.
there's still more questions. You mentioned Merck. How do you spell the Merck? You mentioned that at the front.
MERCK.
Yeah, that's fine. And the H bones, what are H bones? You mentioned H bones.
Oh yeah, they're the bones around. They're the pelvis bones, but the shape makes an H. So the reason
Yeah.
that they're referred to as that is just because they're H shaped. And so the two, I suppose you can still see me. The two, because of the way the pelvis is shaped, the wings that come up. If you were looking at the pig from behind, the wings that come up of the pelvis, you can feel the two tops of the H, as it were.
Grand. Sorry, there's a few people who missed the pictures. I must have put the poll up too quick, so sorry about that. But with regards to mineral deficiencies, we are seeing that zinc has been removed from feed. How do you see this being substituted, please?
It's interesting, isn't? Well, it's not interesting for you guys. You're going to struggle possibly with control. I think that it is going to cause a problem, and they are looking at the moment. I know that they're looking into alternatives. I've seen some recent research write-ups about, can we use this or that instead? So I think there will be things developed, but yeah, how quick that will become available, in diets as an alternative, I'm not quite sure.
How long should paddocks be rested? That was
It
another question.
varies. So I had that. I can't remember if it was actually on a slide or not. But basically, it depends on what sort of worm you have. So if depending on some of the worms will just persist for years and years and years, and you may not be able to go back to that paddock. But if you're resting in a production system, then if you're able to rotate, it depends how much land you have. The best would be for you to be resting a paddock for a year if you know you've got a worm infestation, um, of one of the sorts that you can actually get rid of by resting. So a year if you can. But I'm aware that if you're a smallholder, quite often the problem often comes up that you've got pig sick pasture because of the fact that you just aren't able to access enough of the land
Yeah,
to be able to do that.
that's great. And again, is the advice to only worm if you have a worm count rather than doing it as a matter of course?
Some of those, as I was saying, there's different pieces of advice here and there online. So if if you are doing an all in, all out, and you're monitoring, and there's no reports from the abattoir of you having white spot liver and so on, then it may be that you will only worm if you've got a worm count. But in other situations where you're breeding animals, then it might be that that's in your health plan to be routinely worming. If you can't do an all in, all out, and you're not rearing on slats, so you don't have a necessarily clean accommodation, then it's quite likely that you'll need to introduce routine worming into there. That's a really good question, actually, because anthelmintic worming drug stewardship is very important. You can develop resistance to the use of anthelmintics. So those worms inside your pig, if any one of those worms got a gene that meant when you treated it with the worming product that particular parasite didn't die, then you've killed all the other worms, and the one left inside your pig is the one that's resistant to that particular wormer. So you can see that if it's then on the pasture, it's just passing eggs from resistant worms, and that builds up. And as a result, you eventually end up with all your worms being resistant to treatment. And that's something that is actually starting to happen, particularly on sheep farms across the world. And 80% of sheep farms in Scotland have resistance to the class of drugs, one of the classes I mentioned, called benzimidazoles. Now, whilst we haven't had to use wormers so much in pigs because a lot of them are indoors on in all out systems, so anthelmintic resistance isn't such a big problem in pigs at the minute. We're very aware that we need to be good stewards of these drugs in order that down the line we can still use these wormers on our animals. So you're really right to ask, do we need to be using wormers routinely, or should we just be using them when there are worms there? And ideally, yes, we should just be using them when there are worms there. So if we are monitoring regularly and we know we have a handle on the situation, if there's no worms there, yeah, please don't worm. But equally, in some situations where you can't rotate your paddocks, where you know you've got an endemic problem, a problem that's there that you can't get shifted, then you will need to have regular worming in your plan.
Excellent. I've got lots of questions. Hiring in a boar, and they're asking about quarantine. How long should you quarantine an incoming breeding boar?
The recommendation that I made for quarantine would be a good blanket recommendation, but it's quite possible that if you're hiring in a boar, people aren't going to be happy for you to have him for all that time. And so you need to recognize that he's a risk. And that's why the commercial piggeries that are really thorough about trying to keep disease out, they either have their own boars or they buy in semen and get it shipped to them on ice. Presume you're aware of that. It's a funny thing to do, isn't it? But that's how the commercial pig industry operates. But the reason they do that is because, well, it's handy, but also it keeps disease out because you're not just circulating a boar around all sorts of different places. So he's a potential risk for bringing in disease, and you need to. I would just say get advice from your vet about if you're bringing him in, how can they recommend someone? Is there a health status where he's coming from? Do you know the diseases they have? Are you at risk of bringing anything in, and so on? Just be aware that you are compromising biosecurity and do your very best to do all you can to prevent bringing stuff in.
Yeah, excellent. I'll combine these questions. This is about mastitis. Best way to reduce the risk of mastitis once you wean your sow, and also if she does get mastitis, the sow, is that her culled? Would you?
It depends on the severity of it, and it depends on how quickly you get in there and how successful treatment is in terms of whether it's her cold or not. No, not necessarily. So I would say no, not necessarily, but get help quickly and get good advice and see where you go from there. You can get all sorts of severity, and she may be sick as well, or it might just be that it's a mild mastitis. In terms of whether or not you can reduce the incidence of mastitis when you're weaning your piglets, if you've got the opportunity to gradually wean them, if you don't have to take them off all at once at 28 days, then that's quite handy. And also in terms of what you do with your feeding levels, so read up on the management factors as well that you can to introduce to make sure that you reduce those risks. In a commercial situation, the piglets all have to be taken out at a set time. But if you're not pushed for time like that, then you can do that weaning a bit more gradually, and they'll naturally decrease their sucking a bit. That will just means her milk production starts to wind down.
Rebecca asks about last week's PowerPoint. There will be PowerPoints, and also the webinars are recorded, so you can go and watch them at your leisure. It's a question from Marty. Should you change their drinking water every day? Sorry, I've lost it there. Marty's from Shetland, so it gets all muddy again very quickly, and they sometimes climb into the big bucket. Of course, they'll be. Yeah.
It's infuriating, isn't it? Yes, change it every day. You know, I mean, basically, again, it's a thing of recognizing the risks. If they've climbed in there and they've cluttered it up, of course, that's going to be more contaminated, potentially diseased water than if they've got clean water. So, you know, you just, if you can change it every day without killing yourself, then yes, that would indeed be the best thing to do, just like it's best for us to drink clean water. But if there's a way that you can stop them all getting in the bucket and make it less accessible, or give them somewhere else that they can get into water, you know, I don't know if you have a wallow as well, but sometimes if you provide them somewhere else that they actually want to get into, you might manage to stop them contaminating that. I'm not telling you that it would necessarily work, but it might help.
That's right. This is a interesting one. Our last batch of pigs used to drink a lot, and the new batch don't drink as much. Feeders providers a wet marsh, and health is generally excellent. Is there anything to worry about? So this
Um,
batch not drinking as much.
Yeah, that is strange, isn't it? I don't know why they're not drinking as much. If they're growing, they're happy, they're running about, they're alive and bright. Alive, yeah, that is pretty important. Alert and bright. Then then no, I wouldn't particularly worry. It's odd that the whole batch is drinking less than the last batch, especially if the last batch was also getting a wet diet. I mean, you know, the
Yeah,
wet diet makes a big difference to how much they'll
yeah,
drink, but it's odd to see if they've all been getting the same diet and nothing else has changed, then it's odd to see a big difference between one batch and another. But as long as that, you know, maybe they just are different in some way, or uh, unless it's much cooler, I suppose that's the other
yeah.
option. Did the
Could be the
last
one.
lot, did you have them when it was a lot warmer weather?
Yeah, that's could be it. Um, this is about the. I'm not saying it right. What is chinket?
Oh, tri
Chinkela?
trichinosis or
Yeah,
trichinosis. Mm,
this is
yes.
uh, told us my pigs are outdoors at abattoir. They would need tested for it as a as uncontrolled housing. So the slaughterhouse has told them they need testing for this.
Oh, right, okay. I wasn't aware of that. Trichinosis is a parasite disease and it's caused by worms. And the reason that people get worried about it is because if it's um in the meat and then you don't cook the meat thoroughly, then people can get it and it can cause real problems in people. Um, I haven't come across that before, but that's not to say it's not common. It's just because, you know, I haven't dealt with that end of things before, that a slaughterhouse would be saying that a pig needs tested for it. So again, if you could just make sure that we have the email address for that
Yeah,
person, then I will go and ask. I may well ask Jill, our favourite colleague,
yeah,
to
yeah.
see. She may well know, or
That's
somebody. And also, I know Alan Ward from Quality Meat Scotland has quite a lot of contact with Brecon Abattoir, so I'm sure that he would be able to help out too, to tell me if
yeah.
that's a normal request. So I'll get back to you.
It's a request from Wishaw Abattoir, the Wishaw.
Okay, that's interesting.
So,
Okie doke.
uh, Julie Robertson is saying this. They test them at the slaughterhouse normally. That's what she's saying. So, like you say, yeah, it's a bit strange. She's getting hers tested at the slaughterhouse, so it's one to look into.
Yeah,
That's great.
I mean that it causes cysts, so you can, you know, if when I'm doing a post-mortem, you get a similar disease in ducks as well, that and it causes cysts in the muscle, so you can usually see it. So at the abattoir, they would be seeing it, but I don't know
Yeah,
what test they would be asking you to do prior
yeah,
to. Yeah, no, that's
yeah.
interesting.
This one's is multi-animal paddocks good for pigs in terms of worms? So
Lots of different species
yeah,
in with.
Must be a mix, yeah.
Possibly rotating different animals through the paddocks may be something, if you've used it for pigs, then using it for another species. In terms of them sharing, then I don't know. I haven't come across, have you, Ross, people that have got
No,
pigs and sheep and cattle in a paddock? I come across
just
people that
just
commonly
when the pigs
co-graze
escape.
cattle and sheep.
Yeah, I was just saying, just when the pigs have escaped,
Escaped.
you've seen them all together. But no, I've never seen them mixed. No.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody was asking me, should you co-graze cattle and sheep, there's a number of good reasons for not putting those two together. There's a number of diseases that they can spread to each other. But in terms of co-grazing pigs with those two species, it's not something that I've ever particularly come across. That there are common diseases to all species, like the salmonellas and so on, that could spread from
Yeah.
one species to
Yeah.
another. But yeah, so I haven't seen specific advice about it ever, but that might just be because not many people have
No,
tried it.
tried it. Yeah, that's right.
And my gut feeling would be probably not the best idea in the world. I can't see an advantage to it anyway. But I can possibly see an advantage to rotating the use of the paddock for one species to the next over time.
Yeah. Here's a question. When you worm pigs, should you move them into a new paddock straight away, or should you allow the effect of the wormer to take effect and then move them in a sense, to get rid of the
Absolutely.
worm?
It makes sense. So there's two answers to that. In the old days, before they were worried about Anthelmintic stewardship and whether or not we would get developing resistance, they would have said exactly what you just said. So worm them, let the wormer take effect, and then move them onto clean paddock, and then the eggs will be gone, and they won't be putting out the last few. Because once you've killed the worms, the worm eggs can be excreted for anything up to sort of 10 to 14 days. So you may still have viable eggs there, even though you've done the worming job. However, if nowadays when they're talking about anthelmintic stewardship in cattle and sheep, they say worm them and don't wait until all the eggs have finished coming out. Move them onto the pasture, because if there were worm eggs there that are from worms that are susceptible to that wormer, then you get some of those put onto the pasture. Whereas if you hold them back on the old pasture and wait until that wormer has taken effect, any worms that are left inside the gut of that sheep are all worms that were resistant to the wormer action. And as a result, when you move that animal onto a new pasture, any eggs that it passes out are just from worms that were resistant to the wormer. So then you get build up of resistance very quickly. However, resistance isn't a big problem yet in pigs, and pig sick pasture can be a big problem. So if you have very limited paddocks and you're wanting to keep your paddocks clean, and you know that you have a worm problem and you're worming for that reason, then I would worm them and hang on until the worm has taken effect, and then put them onto the clean pasture. If you know that the other pasture, if you know it's genuinely clean, I would try and keep it as clean as possible.
Okay. For extensive grazing pigs, is lysine inclusion in feed required, or is the natural lysine present sufficient?
I do not know. Ross, you know more about pig diets than I do.
No, not to that level, but Alan, if you want to, next week we're having a feeding webinar for pigs, so please join us there, and I'll write that down so we're ready. but I'll look it up, and again, anyone, we've got a feeding webinar next week, so that'll be great.
Great question, though.
Yeah,
thank you for knowing so much. You've
yeah,
obviously done your research, and you're concerned about providing the right stuff for your pigs. So, yeah, thank you for the good question.
that's excellent. I think that's us. I think we are finished. Just a bit more clemency. again, this is regarding the slaughterhouse, the pig being released. It delays the pig being released after slaughter, i.e. to go to the butcher. This is a Wishaw abattoir.
Right. Well, if they have to wait for the test to be done at the abattoir, do you mean? So that's why they're wanting the test
Possibly,
done
yeah.
themselves.
Before,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you, Clemency. Clemency, I will get back to you about that. It's interesting, and it's just because I haven't raised my own pigs and sent them for slaughter, it wasn't something that I was aware of as a routine thing. So I'm aware of trichinosis, but I didn't realise the practical implications it had at the time of slaughter. So I'll go and find out about that. As I say, I do know Alan Ward from Quality Meat Scotland to talk to, and I know Grace Webster as well from one of the pig practice. She runs a specialist pig practice in Aberdeenshire. So both of those are regularly at the slaughterhouse. They go and do the lung scoring to look for mycoplasma pneumonia in the big commercial pig herds. So they'll be much more aware of that sort of thing, I'm sure. And I'll have a chat to them, and then I'll get back to you. Hopefully be able to give you a hand. Once we're in contact, you'll be able to explain to me really clearly your question, so I make sure I go and get the right answers.
Brilliant. That's the thing, isn't it? Unfortunately, we're not, as a group, where someone from the group would have said, a lot of people in the group are giving suggestions, and that's, unfortunately, we could open all your mics, but it'd be just
guys, I wish I could hear you, because that would be really helpful. Because like Ross says, that on these nights, I definitely build up my knowledge by hearing from attendees and hearing your experiences. So it'd be super useful if I could hear you right now.
Brilliant. Hannah, thank you so much for your exceptionally detailed meeting. That was great, and I'm glad we've gone well over, but who cares? A lot of people have got a lot from it. There's no question. A lot of good response from the chat. So thanks very much, Hannah. And as we say, this webinar is recorded, so people will be able to see it who haven't been able to come on today. And of course, maybe in the next, we'll certainly hope to do more webinars, and we'll get you back. There's no question about that.
Thank you for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks. And to everyone who stayed to the bitter end, thank you so much. Oh, they're all now, you must all be going now. But thank you so much. And remember, our third webinar is next week on feeding, and the following week Emma's back to do breeding. So
brilliant.
A couple more, and I'm really pleased that you're enjoying them. So thanks very much, and have a good evening. Thank you.